Good afternoon, students. I'm Dr. Eric Halford, and welcome to this week's lectures on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and human motivation. Now, this is a really interesting subject which you can use as part of your own life. You can use it to help and guide others in their own development, and you can use it in the workplace. So, really interesting topic and one I personally enjoy studying and talking about. Now, as a result of these lectures, the learning outcomes you'll be able to demonstrate are that by the end of it, you'll have an appreciation of the basic motivational drivers in human behaviour. You'll have an understanding of how human needs contribute to effective management and leadership. And then finally, you'll understand some of the critical problems with Maslow's theory. So they are the learning outcomes for the lectures. So we'll jump straight in with a bit of a recap on some of Maslow's stuff. Now, I'll show you a diagram of the hierarchy of needs in a few moments, but there's some really key arguments regarding Maslow's theory. And the first one is that human needs are structured in a particular order, and they go from the most basic needs to what Maslow describes as self-actualization, which is right at the top of the pyramid. Now, one of the main theories within Maslow's work is that the next one does not become important until one is fulfilled. So if you have a basic physiological need which isn't being met, you won't be interested in self-actualization until you've gone through covered physiological needs and all the needs in between. And another key element of the theory is that basic needs dominate human motivation unless they're satisfied. And what those basic needs tend to be is physiological needs and those around safety and relationships. All the things that human beings and all animals to a large degree need just to generally survive. So it's very similar to ERG theory from that perspective. And in ERG theory, we talk about existence needs. So it's quite similar to those needs. Now, here is my favourite image of the hierarchy of needs with some nice little caricatures of Mr. Maslow himself. So as we can see at the bottom there, you've got the physiological needs, which as it outlines is things like breathing, food, water, sex, sleep, and going to the toilet. So what are the basic human needs people need fulfilling? And these are, as strange as it sounds, you will come across the need as a leader within a police service to meet these needs. If you think of a major incident where you've got officers stood on a cordon for sometimes 8 to 10 hours, they have some basic physiological needs that they need fulfilling, which is food and water, and they need to be able to go to the toilet. If they can't fulfill those needs, they won't be able to make sure that they are safe and other people are safe, because those basic needs will take control. So if you think this isn't ever going to be relevant to you in the workplace, it 100% is. And then the next level is safety. So what we're talking about there is presuming an individual has all their other needs met, the next level of need is that they need to feel secure. And in today's modern environment, that is things like, obviously being safe from assault or injury, but also having security in terms of employment and family setups or health and other belongings. They've got safety, and as a result, they can feel a little bit more content. And then the next level is love and belonging. Now that is your friends and your family and intimacy with other people in the world, and that's a pretty basic human need, and it's one where if human beings don't get fulfilled, they can become very depressed and motivation can take a real hit. And then the next one is esteem needs. Now that is think about reward and recognition. That is where that comes into. So presumably as an individual, you've got your physiological safety and love and belonging needs met. And then what we need is to be able to reward people for doing a good job. And that helps by motivation, by increasing people's confidence in themselves, raising the self-esteem, increases respect of themselves by others, and it's really a good factor in keeping people nice and motivated. And then the top one is where we try and get to, but and we'll all probably hit it at some point, and throughout our lives we'll periodically fall out of any of these sorts of areas, and that's where people's priorities often change, because what might you might hit a stage in your life where all of those needs are being met and you're in a really happy, contentful place, and then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon something happens at home and a loved one takes poorly or tragically passes away, then straight away you're being hit in terms of your love and belonging, and your safety has been hit because your family makeup has been disrupted. So rightly at that moment in time, your desire to continue with growth at a personal level or intellectually takes a real nosedive, and it really isn't your priority at that moment in time, and understandably so. So if you think about this model in terms of your staff and your people who might work for you at various stages throughout your career, you can really start to understand what's going on with people. And the trick is being able to spot this. But we'll talk about how we can do that in some of the forthcoming slides. Now, the theory is really steeped in a lot of history, and a lot of research has shown how Maslow's theory is present in quite a lot of religions, particularly things like Buddhism, where some of the core principles are around following a pathway that leads you to self-actualization, and mindfulness and things are really concepts that enable that. So it does have quite a religious underpinnings, and quite a lot of religions, however, will think or will try and profess that they can achieve self-actualization without having to address some of the basic needs, or that the basic needs don't apply to them. So, controversially, sometimes Maslow falls out with that sort of the religious aspects of life, and the theory and religion don't strictly neatly match together, but they do have a lot of similarities in terms of that self-actualization. So some of the common assumptions: number one is that it assumes that if people are left in a natural state, they'll be potentially destructive and will do literally anything to fulfill their needs. And that really is, think of caveman times. If you can't have your physiological needs met, like food and water, you'll revert to potentially quite an aggressive individual, and you'll do anything you can to fulfill that need. And back in caveman times, it was as simple as they would kill each other for resources, and that has been the way for generations and centuries, really. So if people feel like those needs aren't being met, they will resort back to their basal instincts. Now, religious systems seek to elevate humankind from those lower level Maslow needs to higher needs, and that's what really religion professes to do to us. It takes us to a place where we're in a better state of consciousness and we're living as better human beings, and that's where the two really can see eye to eye. Now, where the two don't always go hand in hand is where leaders and figures in some religious beliefs are not controlled by those lower needs and transcend those things. Now, many leaders, particularly within certain religions, might feel that, but in reality, is that true? Now, people have various beliefs, and I'm not saying either is right or wrong, or religions are right or wrong. What I'm saying here is that is potentially an area where this theory conflicts with some elements of religious aspects of self-actualization. Now, what are the strengths of the theory? Now, intuitively, it appeals to our common sense. It feels like it's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty simple to understand, and it really is. The trick to making it work, though, and where it becomes difficult, is being able to spot it in others, and spot which needs are and aren't being met at any particular time. So it does really speak some truths about human behaviour, like I've said, and challenges some religions in terms of what the physiological needs are that we all really need, and that is just based in our primal instincts, really. And Maslow is quite open and honest about that. Now, it does have some problems. Now, human needs aren't unilateral, so although those physiological needs might be present in all people, the safety needs across different populations will change. So, what the theory can't do is say what is a need for one person in one country or situation might not necessarily be a need for a person in another country or situation. You know, with the exception probably of the physiological needs, because food and water are food and water, and you need that whether you're in Ethiopia or in the United Kingdom. But in the United Kingdom, what we might say in terms of a safety need or a relationship need is being in a safety need is being in a nice house with a roof over our heads. We would say that's absolutely key to us being able to concentrate on achieving the next level. But in Ethiopia, they might live a slightly more simple lifestyle, and for them, they won't necessarily want bricks and mortar in terms of buildings around them. They might be content with something a little less more fundamental. So, if that's the case, then the two aren't the same and you can't compare each other. So, it does begin to break down a little bit from that perspective. So, and it also doesn't account for cultural differences. And what we have to accept is that some cultures are less selfish than others. So, the Western society, particularly the capitalist agenda, we would say culturally we seek material things a lot more than some other cultures. So, our terms of satisfaction in terms of needs being met would be different than a different culture, for instance, particularly something like Buddhism, where they are very happy to have, a very simple lifestyle, and their needs are very different culturally to what someone living in a Western community might seek. Now, this is what I alluded to in terms of how the interpretation of it comes into play. It's very difficult to measure how and when people's needs are being met. Now, I can tell you some tactics I use, and we'll go into those in the lectures shortly. But this is where the real skill comes into interpreting Maslow's theory. So it does have some limitations, as we've outlined there. But broadly, I would say it's well researched, it's empirical, and has a lot of weight behind it, and is proven to be effective. The trick is in identifying if, how, and when you can implement it. So let's talk about another side of motivation. Now, what there often is in the world is intrinsic and extrinsic motivation factors. So Maslow talks about things in terms of a hierarchy. Now, other scholars in motivation will talk about things in terms of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And what they're describing here is intrinsic motivation is that which arises from performing the task. So that is that sense of well-being, that sense of achievement, that sense of satisfaction at doing something. You've probably all worked in different situations where you've come out of it and felt, I feel really good about doing that. Me, I like to do all sorts of things. I like to go to the gym. I like to do some physical training. I like, painting and decorating at home. I like working in the garden. And when I've done those things, I get intrinsic motivation out of them. I feel a sense of achievement for completing them. You don't need to give me anything to do that. It's something I will do off my own back. Whereas somebody else might not like any of the things I've described there and would need an extrinsic reward for that. And they are results, that extrinsic motivating factors are results from expectation of receiving an external reward. So, I like to go to the gym and do some physical activity. Other people might not want to do that. But obesity is a real health crisis at the moment. And with the coronavirus pandemic sweeping the globe, it makes you an extremely high risk person if you're obese. And as a result, you have a higher mortality rate. So, what governments may start implementing is extrinsic rewards to encourage people to go to the gym, which is something I would do for an intrinsic reward out of pleasure. But other people might be given £20 or a financial reward for doing it. or some vouchers or some other reward for doing it. So what rewards me might not reward someone else, and what is intrinsic to me might need to be extrinsic for other people. So some example of extrinsic rewards are our salary. All of us would like to feel like we do a job because we love it, but ultimately for us to meet Maslow's needs and that need of safety and having a roof over our heads, we need a salary to be able to pay for that and pay the bills and put food on the table. So although we would all like to think we do our work out of intrinsic desire, ultimately we are doing it for a salary, or most of us are doing it for a salary. Now, happy people can combine the two and can get paid from doing something that they get intrinsic motivation from doing. But the reality of the world is most of us need to be paid, and we need to be paid, so we have to have a job, and we are motivated to get a job because of an extrinsic reward. If we can combine the two, then brilliant. And internally, pay rises are the same, targets are the same, promotion. These are all extrinsic reward factors. Now, the bottom line is that any approach that offers a reward for performance is destined to be ineffective. That is what some of the scholars say about extrinsic reward, because there's a lot of competing research about whether the two are compatible or contrary, which is right and which is wrong. Now, this research indicates that any approach that offers a reward is going to be ineffective, and that is because it doesn't intrinsically motivate a person. Now, as we'll learn as we proceed through this lecture, that isn't strictly true, but there are certain conditions where offering someone a reward won't be effective, and we'll give some examples of that. But what Daniel Pinks argues is that extrinsic reward extinguishes intrinsic motivation and actually can diminish a person's performance. So if you think of motivation as being directly linked to performance, and discretionary effort, which is something I talk about a lot, discretionary effort being the amount of performance someone brings to work, that is entirely down to a person's motivation. So for us to get the most out of a person, we need to be able to understand what motivates them. So if we go around throwing rewards at everybody and extrinsic reward factors such as pay or prizes, what Daniel Pink is arguing is that you fundamentally might demotivate somebody, and he has a theory as to why that is. So it's important that you understand when you can and can't use these types of reward factors. So here is Daniel Pink, who's a modern contemporary in terms of talking about human motivation, and particularly the two types of reward factors. And he wrote a best-selling book on the subject. Now, what you do have to urge here is some caution, because although it is empirically tested and research focused, and he will admit to this, both intrinsic and extrinsic reward factors can be used to motivate people in lots of different situations. So it's not simple, but this is a really interesting and fun video, so you're going to enjoy this, guys.
I need to make a confession at the outset here. A little over 20 years ago, I did something that I regret, something that I'm not particularly proud of, something that in many ways I wish no one would ever know, but that here I feel kind of obliged to reveal. In the late 1980s, in a moment of youthful indiscretion, I went to law school. Now, in America, law is a professional degree. You get your university degree, then you go on to law school. And when I got to law school, I didn't do very well. To put it mildly, I didn't do very well. I, in fact, graduated in the part of my law school class that made the top 90% possible. Thank you. I never practiced law a day in my life. I pretty much wasn't allowed to. But today, against my better judgment, against the advice of my own wife, I want to try to dust off some of those legal skills, what's left of those legal skills. I don't want to tell you a story. I want to make a case. I want to make a hard-headed evidence-based, dare I say lawyerly case for rethinking how we run our businesses. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, take a look at this. This is called the candle problem. Some of you might have seen this before. It was created in 1945 by a psychologist named Carl Duncker. Carl Duncker created this experiment that's used in a whole variety of experiments in behavioral science. And here's how it works. Suppose I'm the experimenter. I bring you into a room. I give you a candle, some thumbtacks, and some matches. And I say to you, your job is to attach the candle to the wall so the wax doesn't drip onto the table. Now, what would you do? Many people begin trying to thumbtack the candle to the wall. Doesn't work. Some people, and I saw somebody kind of make the motion over here, some people have a great idea where they light the match, melt the side of the candle, try to adhere it to the wall. It's an awesome idea, doesn't work. And eventually, after 5 or 10 minutes, most people figure out the solution, which you can see here. The key is to overcome what's called functional fixedness. You look at that box and you see it only as a receptacle for the tacks, but it can also have this other function as a platform for the candle. Candle problem. Now, I want to tell you about an experiment using the candle problem done by a scientist named Sam Glucksberg, who's now at Princeton University in the US. This shows the power of incentives. Here's what he did. He gathered his participants and he said, I'm going to time you how quickly you can solve this problem. To one group, he said, I'm going to time you to establish norms, averages, for how long it typically takes someone to solve this sort of problem. To the second group, he offered rewards. He said, if you're in the top 25% of the fastest times, you get $5. If you're the fastest of everyone we're testing here today, you get $20. Okay, now this is several years ago, adjusted for inflation. It's a decent sum of money for a few minutes of work. Okay, it's a nice motivator. Question, how much faster did this group solve the problem? Answer, it took them on average 3.5 minutes longer. 3.5 minutes longer. Now, this makes no sense, right? I mean, I'm an American. I believe in free markets. That's not how it's supposed to work, right? If you want people to perform better, you reward them, right? Bonuses, commissions, their own reality show, incentivize them. That's how business works. But that's not happening here. You've got an incentive designed to sharpen thinking and accelerate creativity, and it does just the opposite. It dulls thinking and blocks creativity. And what's interesting about this experiment is that it's not an aberration. This has been replicated over and over and over again for nearly 40 years. These contingent motivators. If you do this, then you get that. Work in some circumstances, but for a lot of tasks, they actually either don't work or often they do harm. This is one of the most robust findings in social science and also one of the most ignored. I spent the last couple of years looking at the science of human motivation, particularly the dynamics of extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators. And I'm telling you, it's not even close. If you look at the science, there is a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And what's alarming here is that our business operating system, think of the set of assumptions and protocols beneath our businesses, how we motivate people, how we apply our human resources. It's built entirely around these extrinsic motivators, around carrots and sticks. That's actually fine for many kinds of 20th century tasks. But for 21st century tasks, that mechanistic reward and punishment approach doesn't work, often doesn't work, and often does harm. Let me show you what I mean. So Glucksberg did another experiment similar to this, where he presented the problem in a slightly different way, like this up here. Okay? Attach the candle to the wall so the wax doesn't drip onto the table. Same deal. You were timing for norms. You were incentivizing. What happened this time? This time, the incentivized group kicked the other group's butt. Why? Because when the tacks are out of the box, it's pretty easy, isn't it? If-then rewards work really well for those sorts of tasks, where there's a simple set of rules and a clear destination to go to. Rewards, by their very nature, narrow our focus, concentrate the mind. That's why they work in so many cases. And so for tasks like this, a narrowed focus where you just see the goal right there, zoom straight ahead to it, they work really well. But for the real candle problem, you don't want to be looking like this. The solution's not over here. The solution's on the periphery. You want to be looking around. That reward actually narrows our focus and restricts our possibility. Let me tell you why this is so important. In Western Europe, in many parts of Asia, in North America, in Australia, white-collar workers are doing less of this kind of work and more of this kind of work. That routine, rule-based, left-brain work, certain kinds of accounting, certain kinds of financial analysis, certain kinds of computer programming has become fairly easy to outsource, fairly easy to automate. Software can do it faster. Low-cost providers around the world can do it cheaper. So what really matters are the more right-brain, creative, conceptual kinds of abilities. Think about your own work. Think about your own work. Are the problems that you face, or even the problems we've been talking about here, are those kinds of problems, do they have a clear set of rules and a single solution? No. The rules are mystifying. The solution, if it exists at all, is surprising and non-obvious. Everybody in this room is dealing with their own version of the candle problem. And for candle problems of any kind, in any field, those if-then rewards, the things around which we've built so many of our businesses, don't work. Now, I mean, it makes me crazy. And this is not, here's the thing, this is not a feeling, okay? I'm a lawyer, I don't believe in feelings. This is not a philosophy. I'm an American, I don't believe in philosophy. This is a fact, or as we say in my hometown of Washington, D.C., a true fact. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Let me marshal the evidence here, because I'm not telling you a story, I'm making a case, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Some evidence. Dan Ariely, one of the great economists of our time, he and 3 colleagues did a study with some MIT students. They gave these MIT students a bunch of games that involved creativity and motor skills and concentration. And they offered them for performance 3 levels of rewards. Small reward, medium reward, large reward. Okay? Do really well, you get the large reward, on down. What happened? As long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. Okay? But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Then they said, okay, let's see if there's any cultural bias here. Let's go to Madurai, India and test this. Reward standard of living is lower. In Madurai, a reward that's modest by North American standards is more meaningful there. Same deal. A bunch of games, 3 levels of rewards. What happens? People offered the medium level of rewards, did no better than people offered the small rewards. But this time, people offered the highest rewards. They did worst of all. In 8 of the 9 tasks we examined across 3 experiments, higher incentives led to worse performance. Is this some kind of touchy-feely socialist conspiracy going on here? No, these are economists from MIT, from Carnegie Mellon, from the University of Chicago. And do you know who sponsored this research? The Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. That's the American experience. Let's go across the pond to the London School of Economics. LSE, London School of Economics, alma mater of 11 Nobel laureates in economics. Training ground for great economic thinkers like George Soros and Friedrich Hayek and Mick Jagger. Just last month, economists at LSE looked at 51 studies of pay-for-performance plans inside of companies. Here's what the economists there said. We find that financial incentives can result in a negative impact on overall performance. There's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And what worries me as we stand here in the rubble of the economic collapse is that too many organizations are making their decisions, their policies about talent and people based on assumptions that are outdated, unexamined, and rooted more in folklore than in science. And if we really want to get out of this economic mess, and if we really want high performance on those definitional tasks of the 21st century, the solution is not to do more of the wrong things, to entice people with a sweeter carrot or threaten them with a sharper stick. We need a whole new approach. The good news about all this is that the scientists who've been studying motivation have given us this new approach. It's an approach built much more around intrinsic motivation, around the desire to do things because they matter, because we like it, because they're interesting, because they're part of something important. And to my mind, that new operating system for our businesses revolves around three elements: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, the urge to direct our own lives. Mastery, the desire to get better and better at something that matters. And purpose, the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. These are the building blocks of an entirely new operating system for our businesses. I'm going to talk today only about autonomy. In the 20th century, we came up with this idea of management. Management did not emanate from nature. Okay? Management isn't, it's not a tree, it's a television set. Okay? Somebody invented it. And it doesn't mean it's going to work forever. Management is great. Traditional notions of management are great if you want compliance. But if you want engagement, self-direction works better. Let me give you some examples of some kind of radical notions of self-direction. And what this means, you don't see a lot of it, but you see the first stirrings of something really interesting going on. Because what it means is, it means paying people adequately and fairly, absolutely. Getting the issue of money off the table, and then giving people lots of autonomy. Let me give you some examples. How many of you have heard of the company Atlassian? Okay, looks like less than half. Atlassian is an Australian software company, and they do something incredibly cool. A few times a year, they tell their engineers, go for the next 24 hours and work on anything you want. As long as it's not part of your regular job, work on anything you want. So the engineers use this time to come up with a cool patch of code, to come up with an elegant hack. Then they present all of these stuff that they've developed to their teammates, to the rest of the company, in this wild and woolly all-hands meeting at the end of the day. And then, being Australians, everybody has a beer. They call them FedEx days. Why? Because you have to deliver something overnight. It's not bad. It's a huge trademark violation, but it's pretty clever. That one day of intense autonomy has produced a whole array of software fixes that might never have existed. And it's worked so well that Atlassian has taken it to the next level with 20% time, done famously at Google, where engineers can spend 20% of their time working on anything they want. They have autonomy over their time, their task, their team, their technique. Okay, radical amounts of autonomy. And at Google, as many of you know, about half of the new products in a typical year are birthed during that 20% time. Things like Gmail, Orchid, Google News. Let me give you an even more radical example of it. Something called the results-only work environment, the ROW, created by two American consultants in place at about a dozen companies around North America. In a row, people don't have schedules. They show up when they want. They don't have to be in the office at a certain time or any time. They just have to get their work done. How they do it, when they do it, where they do it, is totally up to them. Meetings in these kinds of environments are optional. What happens? Almost across the board. Productivity goes up, worker engagement goes up, worker satisfaction goes up, turnover goes down. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are the building blocks of a new way of doing things. Now, some of you might look at this and say, that sounds nice, but it's utopian. And I say, nope. I have proof. In the mid-1990s, Microsoft started an encyclopedia called Encarta. They had deployed all the right incentives. They paid professionals to write and edit thousands of articles. Well-compensated managers oversaw the whole thing to make sure it came in on budget and on time. A few years later, another encyclopedia got started. Different model, right? Do it for fun. No one gets paid a cent or a euro or a yen. Do it because you like to do it. Now, if you had, just 10 years ago, if you had gone to an economist anywhere and said, hey, I got these two different models for creating an encyclopedia. If they went head to head, who would win? 10 years ago, you could not have found a single sober economist anywhere on planet Earth who would have predicted the Wikipedia model. This is the titanic battle between these two approaches. This is the Ali Frazier of motivation, right? This is the thriller in Manila, all right? Intrinsic motivators versus extrinsic motivators. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose versus carrots and sticks. And who wins? Intrinsic motivation, autonomy, mastery, and purpose in a knockout. Let me wrap up. There's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And here's what science knows. One, those 20th century rewards, those motivators we think are the natural part of business, do work, but only in a surprisingly narrow band of circumstances. Two, those if-then rewards often destroy creativity. Three, the secret to high performance isn't rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive, the drive to do things for their own sake, the drive to do things because they matter. And here's the best part. Here's the best part. We already know this. The science confirms what we know in our hearts. So if we repair this mismatch between what science knows and what business does, if we bring our motivation, notions of motivation into the 21st century, if we get past this lazy, dangerous ideology of carrots and sticks, we can strengthen our businesses, we can solve a lot of those candle problems, and maybe, we can change the world. I rest my case.
Brilliant video, that, guys. I really enjoy that one, and I've watched that video multiple times. I really enjoy it, and I can tell you this from the heart as well. It absolutely works. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And what you will find within policing as well is that we don't have the capability to offer extrinsic reward. We can't pay people to work harder. We can't pay people to do things faster. We don't even have that option. So for us to increase discretionary effort, we have to think of a better way to motivate our people. Now, luckily for us, what Daniel Pink tells us is that there's 3 ways we can do that: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. By autonomy, he means let people work when they need to work and have autonomy as to how they work. We can do that within some given restraints. Mastery, what he's actually talking about there in terms of mastery is helping them become better at doing things. We're talking about growth. So we certainly have control over what training courses we send people on. We have control over what sort of research we will let them do. We have control over whether we will sponsor people to go to university and study for degrees. We have control over all of those things, and they can increase mastery. And as a result, people will pay you back in increased motivation and engagement in the workforce. And then the final one we can definitely control is a sense of purpose. 99% of the people who come through the front door and start working as police officers do it because they want to make a difference. So we just need to keep reminding people why they joined the job to be here as a police officer. And if we do that well, we can keep motivating people. So that's the end of lecture 1. Come back shortly for lecture 2, and we'll continue the discussion on how we can motivate people.